Today you're going to talk about and find out more about soil. I know you are thrilled and can't wait. A lot of people think soil is the same thing as dirt, but it's not. Soil is actually very healthy, and dirt is just kind of dried up and really has no value to it. So in this picture that you see, this very dark grainy stuff, that's soil. That's good, healthy soil that would be able to grow a lot of plants. So first let's find out what soil is. So here's our definition. This should be fairly close to the one that you have in your definitions. It's a loose mixture of small mineral fragments, organic material, water, and air that can support the growth of vegetation. So lots of things in here that we need to pick up on. First of all, that we know it's made of small mineral fragments. That's just weathered pieces of rock. It's also made of organic material, which we learned a while back that organic means it used to be living. So it's got things in it like dead leaves or dead animal remains. Good healthy soil also has water in it, so it's kind of moist feeling. And then finally it actually has air, and that's why it's a loose mixture. That air allows things to grow well in it. So if it has all of those things, and it's able to support the growth of vegetation, then that's good healthy soil. All that means is that it can allow things to grow in it. Now if you were to travel around to different states or even different countries, you would see that not all soil is the same. And the reason for this is because it's made of weathered rock. Well, different places have different kinds of rock. So that is going to produce different kinds of soil. In good healthy soil, there's lots of different parts to it. First thing we need to know about is a horizon or soil horizon, and all that is a layer of soil. Now you can have several layers together, and good healthy soil does have lots of different layers to it, but each individual layer is called a soil horizon. In some of those horizons is something called humus, not hummus. Hummus is what you eat, and it's spelled differently. This is humus. And what humus is it's very dark in color, but it's dark organic material formed in the soil from the decayed remains of plants and animals. So this is what gives it that darker color, and it's because it's all the organic material. When leaves fall off of trees or plants or whatever, they decompose and become part of the soil, which is this humus. Same thing with animals. So now we're going to look at each individual horizon, and we're going to label it on your notes. So up at the top, we have what's called Horizon A, and this is where the topsoil is. This layer also has a lot of humus in it, and so for this reason, this layer is super important because this is where all the nutrients are. This is what kind of feeds the plants that are growing in the soil. Underneath that, we have Horizon E. And what you need to know about this layer is that this is where a lot of leaching happens, and we'll talk about leaching in a second. Underneath that is Horizon B, and in this layer, this is where all the nutrients kind of end up, because usually this is where the roots of the plants are, and they get collected from the horizons up above them. Horizon C is partially weathered rock, so a little bit of weathering is happening. And then the last layer, Horizon R, is what we call bedrock, and really this is where lots of solid rock pieces are because weathering can't really happen down there. Topsoil, when we say that, all we're referring to is the top layer. That's why it's called that. But the reason it's so important is because, like I said, that's where all the nutrients are. All the humus is there, which is full of nutrients, and that's what plants need to grow. If they don't have that, they're going to have a hard time growing. The way plants get those nutrients is through a process called infiltration. And infiltration is just how easily the water can flow through the soil. So when we look at this picture here, each of these big dots here, that's not supposed to look like a 6. These represent sediments, okay? So in this first picture to the left, what we see is that there's lots of spaces in between them. This was what they call pore space. And so this is basically air pockets, and this is where water can get through. So we would say this picture on the left that the water can infiltrate it fairly quickly or easily because it has a lot of space. But when we look over here, they're so tightly packed together, I can't even highlight or circle anything because they're right on top of each other. So water would have a hard time getting in between these spaces because they're so tightly packed together. So this soil over here on the right is going to have a harder time getting the water to get to the roots of the plant, which carries the nutrients to it. So soil should allow water to get to the plant's roots, but you don't want it to cause the plant to be completely saturated. If it gets too much water, then it basically drowns the plant and dies. So infiltration is just how easily the water can get to those plant roots based on how tightly packed together the sediment is. So the process that gets those nutrients to the roots is called leaching. And the definition here is the removal of substances that can be dissolved from rock or layers of soil due to the passing of water. So all that means is water is going to carry the nutrients from the top, or that horizon A, down to the plant roots, which are in horizon B. So here we see this in action. Here's the top. This is where all the nutrients are. Really, all these little white dots would be considered nutrients, okay? So what happens is, as rain penetrates and falls through the ground, it's going to make its way down. But as it's coming, it's picking up these nutrients. And water's going to keep flowing all the way down to horizon B, which is where these roots are. Now remember, infiltration is how easily it passes. Sometimes it passes fast because there's a lot of air pockets in the soil. Sometimes it passes very slow because the soil is so densely packed together. But leaching is just the process that takes the nutrients from the top and carries them down to the plant roots. Earlier we said that there's many different types of soil, depends on where you are. And here are some other reasons for that. The climate of an area can determine the type of soil that's there. The slope of the land, if it's very steep, if it's very flat. Like we said earlier, different kinds of rocks. Different types of vegetation or plants that grow there. They add things to the soil, so that can alter what it's made of too. And then finally, the amount of time that the rock has been weathered. So far we've seen how important soil is. I mean, without it, we really wouldn't have our food, because that's ultimately where it comes from in the beginning. So without good, healthy soil, we would all suffer from that. So then how do we protect it? One thing we do is practice soil conservation. And all that means is that it's a way to maintain the fertility of the soil by protecting it from erosion and nutrient loss. Now that's a lot of fancy words, but it's really pretty simple. Maintain means that we just want to keep it the same. The fertility means that the nutrients that are in it, it's fertile. That just means things can grow in it. So we want to keep all the nutrients in the soil, and we're going to do that by protecting it from two main things. From erosion, which we know from our last unit is the movement of sediment. So we want to keep the sediments in place in this case. And we want to protect it from nutrient loss. We don't want the nutrients to dry up or get gone or be eroded away. So if we can do those things, then that creates good, healthy soil. And if you think of what this word conservation means, think of the word conserve. If somebody asks you to conserve water, that means you save it, you don't waste it. So in this case, we want to save or protect the soil. Aside from providing us food, there's also other reasons that soil is very important. One reason, obviously, it provides the nutrients for the plants, it provides housing for animals, and it's also a place to store water, and some of our drinking water is stored in soil. If we're going to protect soil, we need to know some of the things that cause erosion, that can alter our soil. So one of those things is using bad farming techniques. Now, none of us here are probably farmers, but this is important because farmers is where our food comes from. And so if they're not using the land properly, then they could be adding to soil erosion and damaging the soil. Lack of plants. If an area of soil doesn't have a lot of plants on it, then it's easy for wind to come along and erode it or move it away, that topsoil where the nutrients are. So plants are important because they help keep the soil in place. And then finally, human activity. Gosh, it seems like everywhere you drive, there's construction going on. A new neighborhood, a new shopping center, whatever. But it seems like the first thing they have to do when they build something is they have to clear out the land. So they get rid of all the plants, they tear up the ground, and you've got all this soil exposed, which could be washed away by wind or by rain. All of these things are bad because they can basically make the land desert-like. And that process is called land degradation. It's where all the nutrients get gone, all the topsoil gets gone, and really once it becomes desert-like, it's really hard to bring it back to life. So finally, we're going to look at these different ways that we can prevent soil and nutrient loss regarding farming techniques. So the first one is called contour plowing. And what that means is we're going to plow across the slope of the hills. Normally in farming, you have to tear up the ground so you can plant the seeds. But in some places, the ground is not very good for farming. It's very hilly, has lots of hills on it. And so what contour plowing does is it keeps the hills, and you just plant your plants right across it. As in the case of this picture here. What we're looking at is an aerial view, so we're looking at it from above. So like this area right here is the top of the hill, and then this is going down the hill. So all these rows, like this one here, this row here, these are all crops of some sort. And so it's keeping the natural shape of the land and not disrupting it. The next farming technique is called terracing. And terracing takes a very steep field, usually on a mountainside or a hill, and it changes it into smaller, flatter fields, almost like taking a mountain like a slide and making it like stairs. So in this picture here, each one of these, theoretically, you could plant something on. It doesn't really look like it, but that's the idea with terracing. Here's a better picture of it. So this is a mountainside, and here this guy is farming or plowing up the land on a step. Here would be another one. So each one of these would be like a step on the side of a hill. So another farming technique is called no-till farming. And no-till farming is when you leave the old stalks in the ground because they provide a cover from rain, they reduce runoff, and they slow down erosion. Typically when you farm, you dig up your old stalks or your old crops and then replant new ones. But in this case, when we look at this picture here, I don't know exactly what crops these are, but let's say it's a type of bean. What this farmer has done is no-till farming. So all these white rows here, these are actually dead crop plants. So let's say they're dead bean plants. He's already gotten all the beans off of them, and they're dead. Instead of pulling those up, which is what most farmers do, they just leave them in the ground. And you can see that, like, you know, some of them have fallen over, like right here. Here's another one that's fallen over. And so, for one, they're going to decompose and become part of the soil and add nutrients to the soil. But again, they also add protection to the soil, and they protect it from wind or from rain coming. Then what he does is these green rows, that's his new crop of beans in this case, so he's going to just plant them right next to him. So he's not tearing up the ground in any way, he is just sort of recycling those old stalks. Another technique is called cover crops. Cover crops are planted in between your harvest to replace nutrients to the ground. So let's say that you're a farmer who normally plants peanuts, and that's your main crop. Well, you can't plant peanuts every season of the year. They only grow in a certain season, and I don't really know what it is. Let's just say it's summer. Well, when it's not summer, you still want to have some kind of plants growing. For one, remember, you always want to have plants in the ground because that protects the soil and keeps it in place. But it also adds nutrients back to the ground. So if peanuts are your main crop, let's say when it's not peanut season, you plant something else random like lettuce. And the whole point is, for one, you've got plants in the ground protecting the soil, but you're also got plants to add nutrients back to the soil. And lastly, another technique called crop rotation. Crop rotation means that you're going to plant different crops on the same field. So it's basically like it says, you're going to rotate your crops. So let's say that this whole square here is your farm. That's where you plant all your things. You've divided it up into 4 sections. And let's say you're going to plant 4 different things, okay? So let's say it looks like, this is hard to read. All right, so let's say in this one I'm going to plant peas, this one I'm going to plant onions, in this box I'm going to plant turnips, and in this one I'm going to plant potatoes, okay? Well, I plant those, gather all the crops, and we eat good. When it's time for me to plant those again, I'm not going to plant them in the same place. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate them. So now my peas that were right here in box 1, they're going to get planted over here in box 2. So everything gets pushed down a box, because what that does is it keeps the soil from using those same nutrients. And that's important because remember, part of soil conservation is we want to protect the soil from nutrient loss. We don't want to use up all the nutrients. So by rotating them like this picture, we're protecting the soil from using up all the nutrients.